On behalf of IBM, hello and welcome to today's webcast entitled Programmatic Access to and Extensibility of the IBM SmartCloud for Social Business. During the presentation, we will have a question and answer session. You can ask a question at any time during the presentation. Click the green Q&A icon on the lower left-hand corner of your screen. Type your question in the open area and click Send to submit. If you would like to view the presentation in a full screen view, click the full screen button in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. Press the Escape key on your keyboard to return to your original view. And finally, for optimal viewing and participation, please disable your pop-up blockers. Should you need technical assistance, as a best practice, we suggest you first refresh your browser by pressing F5 on your keyboard. If that does not resolve the issue, please click on the menu option in the upper right-hand corner of your screen and then select Support. It is now my pleasure to turn the webcast over to our speakers, Philippe, Riand, Niklas, Heidloff, and Mark Wallace. Philippe, over to you.
Thank you, Tracy, and good morning, good evening, everybody. So first, I'm going to show you these disclaimers slide, telling you that we have some material, but there is no commitment from IBM with what is within the slides. That's the legal stuff. So now let's go right into the session and the agenda. So this session is really by developers for developers. So we're going to give you an introduction to SmartCloud for social business, but from a developer viewpoint. So the first thing we're going to do is to give you a quick introduction to SmartCloud for social business, what it is and what it means for developers. Then Niklas will introduce us to some real-life scenarios involving the social platform. And right after, we're going to give you some insights on how to develop application for SmartCloud for social business, and that will be Mark and I. And finally, I will conclude this session by giving you some references and some information of what is coming next to SmartCloud for social business. And of course, Tracy will host us a Q&A section at the very end of the presentation as well. So what is SmartCloud for social business? We can really see SmartCloud for social business as a social framework. And this social framework has two big set of features. The first one is what the end users are seeing when they connect to the platform through their web browser or through their mobile devices. This is a set of applications that are ready to use. But what interests us from a developer standpoint is really the second set of features, which is a set of social services that are ready to be consumed by any applications. And in these services, we're talking about social services like profiles, like communities, activities, activity streams, files, etc., or also some instant messaging and meetings APIs, and finally emails. So this is what we're going to focus on today, the set of services that is provided by SmartCloud. So what is relevant here for us as developers in this platform? The first thing is we can extend the applications, the set of applications in SmartCloud, and we can consume all the services provided by the platform. So by extending the platform, I mean we can add capabilities to the different menus, we can add actions, or we can also register external applications into the main UI of SmartCloud for social business. And by consuming the services, I mean that you can really access all the social data through a set of REST services. It includes profiles, communities, activities, all the services that we talked about previously. There is also a set of APIs that is very specific to SmartCloud for social business and to the nature of cloud computing, and it's about managing customers and users. So we have what we call the BSS APIs that you can use to provision users and customers as well as create subscriptions to SmartCloud for Social Business. From a developer standpoint, you can also customize SmartCloud for Social Business. You can apply your own theme, so basically your colors, logos, and different UI artifacts in the web application. And you can also customize some of the URLs and the logos of your company, so you can add the logo of your company to the UI. Finally, everything that we're talking about here is based on open standards. So all the APIs are available through a REST interface, and the payload that is being exchanged between your application and SmartCloud for Social Business is either Atom or JSON, based on the open social specification. And SmartCloud is also coming with a whole security model involving the top security, involving the authentication mechanism like OAuth and SAML. So the thing that you should really get from this is everything that is in SmartCloud for Social Business is actually based on open standards. So you can consume that from almost any language and any tool that you are comfortable with. And to give you now an overview of what you can do, let me ask Niklas to show us some real life scenarios. Niklas?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Phil. Let me move to the next slide. So before we'll dive deeper on the technical aspects, how you build integrations with a SmartCloud for Social Business, I'd like to describe first a couple of potential integration scenarios, or in other words, what you can build. Essentially, there are two types of different scenarios. The first one is what we call inside-out scenarios, where the SmartCloud for Social Business is extended in different ways, and it pulls in third-party applications and or services. One example that I'm going to demonstrate in a minute is a way to add your own actions into the SmartCloud user interface. And technically, you need to use extension points, gadgets, and widgets in order to build these extensions. While the first type of scenarios is about extensibility of the SmartCloud user interface, the second type of scenarios utilize the SmartCloud for Social Business services. Essentially, it uses the SmartCloud as an infrastructure. And we call these types of scenarios outside-in scenarios. And you build these types of scenarios using the Social Business Toolkit SDK. You can use this SDK to build your own social apps. And when you do that, you can really focus on the implementation of your specific business requirements. And as I said, you can leverage SmartCloud as an infrastructure, and you can leverage the existing services like files, profiles, forums, etc. Next, I want to demonstrate a sample which actually showcases both types of the scenarios. I have a fictional sample that shows how a SmartCloud community can be used to communicate between a company and their partners. It also shows a custom app which is used internally so that you can have internal discussions that you don't want to have in front of your partners. In other words, the sample that I'm going to demonstrate really brings together the best of these two worlds, the best of the out-of-the-box SmartCloud functionality and the power and flexibility of custom apps. Just before I start with the actual demo, let me give you some more background. The SmartCloud for Social Business allows to easily invite external people to communities. I think that's one of the major benefits of the SmartCloud. And in my example, partners can be invited very easily without having to add them to any internal or corporate directories first. And also by using an existing SmartCloud community, you can leverage more of the out-of-the-box functionality, for example, the ability to synchronize files to your mobile apps. So here's a little bit more about my fictional scenario. The company that I've come up with is called Zeta Insurance, and it's a fictive health insurance company that sells products through their brokers. And the product, so as I said, they use a SmartCloud community to communicate between or with their partners. And the community is used to share product brochures, to share news, and also the brokers can ask questions about the products via the forums in that community. The support specialists from Zeta Insurance do not use the SmartCloud user interface. They use an internal custom support application. And this allows them to do two things that are not possible via the SmartCloud community's out-of-the-box functionality. First, the custom app provides functionality to avoid that multiple support specialists work on the same question at the same time. Because there is a notion called claim where certain support specialists can take ownership of certain questions. And then second, there is a way to have internal discussions. So if a support specialist doesn't know the answer directly, he or she can ask his or her colleagues first. So just one last slide before I start with the demo. Here are the personas that I'm going to use in my demonstration here. I have three different people. Paul is an insurance broker, and he uses only the SmartCloud community. And then there are Samantha and Ellen, the support specialists working for Zeta Insurance, and they use only the internal support app. So let's get started. Now, I mentioned that I'm going to demonstrate you something, but it's actually not a live demo, unfortunately, because of technical limitations or reasons because of this e-meeting here. We can only use screenshots, and I really hope that you can read enough here. And we've also planned to publish the actual live demos later on YouTube. So here is the relative empty SmartCloud community. In the upper left corner, you can see that it's my Zeta Insurance organization. I'm using here my own organization on the SmartCloud test environment called C1. I've created a restricted community called Partner Community, and only the three people in the right column have access to it. Now, this is the place, as I mentioned, where insurance brokers can now see a list of files which are the product brochures of these or for these different health insurance plans. And then at the bottom, let me go back, at the bottom there are the forums where insurance brokers can actually ask questions. And this is what I want to do next. So Paul, the insurance broker, starts now a new topic, and he basically asks for are costs for parents covered when child is in hospital. And he enters all the information and then saves it. And after that, the new topic shows up here in the community. Now let's switch to the second persona, Samantha, who is a support specialist. Now Samantha does not use the SmartCloud community user interface. Instead, she uses an internal support application. It's actually a bigger general partner communication application which contains functionality like a directory of partners, news for partners, programs, events. And what I want to focus on here today is this first tab, support. Now, there is a view called, or under team questions, called new questions, where Samantha sees all the new questions that are coming in. And this is the one that Paul just created. Now, from here, she can open it, and then she sees the full thread if there is more than just the first actual question. And here is where Samantha can now press this claim button, which means that she's responsible to work and to answer this question. No other support specialist sees this question in the new questions view, and only Samantha can actually answer it. So now she claims it, and after that, there are new buttons or new actions showing up: answer, ask partner, and ask team. Now let's assume that in the first step, Samantha needs to know some more information from the insurance broker. So she types in here, I'll investigate, just one quick question, how old is the child? And then she presses the button, ask partner. So the new comment shows up here, and it also shows up in the SmartCloud community, the user interface that Paul is using, right? And he sees now the question from Samantha and can answer that, he says, sorry, I forgot to mention that his son is 10 years old. Okay, after he has done that, obviously his answer shows up here in the SmartCloud user interface, and it also shows up back in the support application that Samantha is using. So now Samantha knows all the information, all the data she has to know from Paul, but unfortunately she cannot answer that question from the top of her head. So she needs to ask colleagues. Now in order to do that, she presses this button, Ask Team. And then she describes the problem again and basically asks for advice. And she presses Ask Team, and then the new entry is also added to this thread. Now, this user interface might not be the most easiest to consume user interface, but the different colors here have a meaning. These green rectangles and also the green buttons basically tell the user that this is information that goes back into the community that is shared with external partners. The entries that are marked here with this blue rectangle, they are internal only, and they never go back. They are never published in the actual community, but they are stored technically here in a nodes database because that whole application has been implemented using X pages. So Samantha asked the question, and now I switch to yet another persona. Well, actually, this is just a screenshot that shows that Paul does not see that new entry because it's internal only. So I skip that step, and now I switch to another persona, and I think his name is Harry. He's the second support specialist. Under the view Team Questions and then Team Input Required, he sees now that that question coming up. He can open it, and now, as you notice, he does not have the actions like answer and contact partner, but he only has this one action or button comment where he can answer Samantha directly. And that's what he does now. He says, good catch, I'll update the brochure. Yes, if the child is younger than 12, one parent can stay. So that's the answer that Samantha needed. When I switch back now to Samantha, and Samantha needs to reopen this entry. So under the view My Claimed Questions, My Questions, she sees that there's the same entry, opens it up. She sees the answer from her colleague, Alan. He's called Alan here, not Harry. Anyway, and so now she knows the answer and can answer. Paul, the insurance broker, she can say, good news, that is indeed covered. And then she hits the button Answer, and the answer shows up here in the internal support application, and it also shows up in the SmartCloud community. Okay, so that was a really simple example for how you can leverage the existing SmartCloud functionality, how you can easily invite external people, in this case partners, and at the same time how you can extend that functionality using custom app dev. Now this is what we called outside in, and now I want to show you just a very quick other sample that shows how to do an inside-out sample scenario. So in that same sample, the insurance broker Paul can open one of these files, which are the product brochures. And now what you see here are two new actions. The first one is Ask Question. The second one is Email Brochure. Now these are actions that have been contributed to the SmartCloud user interface using extension points. And essentially you call URLs that then can invoke your own applications. So now let's assume I click here on this action, Email Brochure. Then another application comes up. It's actually a very easy application. It's just one page and even a simple page. And here the product broker has the possibility to enter recipient and the body. And as it's highlighted here, this will attach automatically this product brochure, this file. And the way that has been implemented is again via the SDK. And at the top, you can see another interesting technical detail because there is the top, the banner here, looks very similar to the SmartCloud Navigator, so that the insurance broker doesn't necessarily or that it's not easy for the insurance broker to figure out that he actually left SmartCloud and enters now a custom app. So those were the two examples that showed both inside-out and outside-in scenarios. And with that, I hand back to Phil.
Thank you very much, Niklas. This is really a great demo, and I'm eager to see you posting a video of the live demo because it's really impressive, and it's a perfect example of using social services inside an existing application. So now let's talk about how we build that and what do we have to do to add social capabilities to our applications. So first of all, we need to connect to SmartCloud. So either your company already has an account in SmartCloud, an organization-based account, or you can actually go to the SmartCloud website and create a new instance, which is a free trial of SmartCloud. And this is offered by IBM today at no cost. And the current conditions is that it's a fully functional instance for your development, well, for your organization here. And it's 60 days at no cost. So I would encourage you to go at the URL that is on this slide and create a sample organization and try to play with that and try to customize it and try to consume the services provided by the platform. The first place you should know as a developer when you use SmartCloud for social business is the administration UI. So it's available to administrators. So if you use your organization instance, then in this case you have to contact your administrator to be able to do some operations. If you have your own organization as a free trial, then of course you're an administrator because you started it, and then you can do the different operations yourself. From this UI, there are several things that a developer can do. First, a developer can manage and register internal applications. And by internal applications, we mean applications that are going to consume the SmartCloud services. What this means is that you can use this UI to create the OAuth keys that your applications will use to connect to the services. So this is very important from a security standpoint. The second thing is that from this UI, you can manage the different extensions, like the action items. Niklas showed us how he added some options to the file menu, and this is where it happens in the administration UI. And finally, you can also customize the profiles for your user, and you can add some custom fields, like, for example, the external identity of your users, like their Twitter account or Facebook account, or actually any kind of information you want to add to a user. So this is a screenshot of this administration UI. The first one is showing you how you add an extension to SmartCloud. So there is a menu about organization extensions here, and then it's just a series of questions that you have to answer about the services and the extension points that you want to implement with your application. So this is very easy. You click Save, and this is registered. So there is no need for a command line or something tricky that you have to do. Everything is done through the UI. The second screenshot shows you how you register an application for OAuth, for using OAuth. And the same UI is available for OAuth 1 and OAuth 2, that are the two different flavors of OAuth being supported by SmartCloud. So same thing, very easy. Then you can copy and paste the keys that are generated here and the secrets that are generated here into your application, and Mark will show that to you in details later. So once you've done that, you have access to your trial organization, you have your OAuth keys being created, so you're ready to go. But where do you start? So all the services are REST services, which means that you can connect to them from any framework or any language that can understand REST services. That's fine. But generally, it's still a bit of work because you have to manage the authentication through OAuth. You have to manage what we call the endpoints for your services, which means the server URL for your services. So it's a kind of a lot of work. And then you have to read the documentation to understand what you can do with these services, what are the payloads, the atom payloads, and how you extract the data from these payloads. Hopefully, IBM is now providing what we call the Social Business SDK. So this SDK is an open source project, so you have full access to the source code for this SDK. And it's coming with some code libraries that are ready to use for Java developers and for JavaScript developers, as well as Domino XPages developers. You just have to install it, and then these libraries are handling all the low-level details of the communication with the server. So then in a matter of minutes and in a matter of few lines of code, you can call any service in the platform. And to show that to you in action, the SDK is coming with a large set of samples that is actually growing, I would say, daily. And right now we have more than 550 JavaScript code samples. We have about 200 of Java code samples, and we have 60 code samples for XPages that are now available as well. If you look at this SDK, you'll see that its APIs are layered. And basically we have three layers. One layer is the core layer, just handling the plumbing, how you connect to a service, how do you authenticate to a service. And all of this is abstracted, so regardless of the authentication mechanism that you want to use, or of LTPA, SAML, or basic authentication, this is encapsulated by the library. A layer above that is handling the business objects coming from the platform. So, for example, what is a profile? What is a community? And how did you access the data from these objects? And finally, which might be very interesting also for you, is a set of UI controls that are ready to use and that can be embedded inside any web application. So if you want to have a list of communities, a list of files, then just get this control, put that in your web page, and you have a fully enabled control with a lot of features that is pre-built for you. And that works regardless of your runtime platform, whenever it's Java, XPages, PHP, or you name them, that should work. So to showcase all these samples, we have what we call the Social Business Playground that also includes an API Explorer. So you can actually connect to this because it's a cloud application running on IBM Greenhouse. So you can see the URL here, which is bit.ly SBT Playground. And from this playground, you can see all the samples that I talked about, all the JavaScript samples, the Java samples, and the XPages snippets. And you'll see more, in the future. And these samples are ready to be copy-paste into your application. Also, there is the API Explorer. So this is an ongoing effort that we are building, and the API Explorer really shows the REST APIs. So it allows you to experiment with the REST API using a kind of an easy user interface. So let me show you some screenshots here about the playground. So this is how we expose code samples. Here I'm exposing one of the JavaScript snippets. So you can see on the left side, you have a list of snippets, and they are ordered by categories. You can also select the environment if you want to connect to SmartCloud for Social Business, or if you want to connect to some on-premises servers, whatever. So you select that in the environment, and you can, of course, define your own environment. And when a snippet is selected, then you can see the source code, and on the very right side of the page, you can see the result of the execution of the source code. More than that, below the result of the execution, you can display the documentation for the snippet, which means the summary explaining what the snippet is about, but also links to the different documentations related to this snippet. So if this snippet is using a community, you can have a direct access to the community documentation here. So It's really better to experiment it live, so I would advise you to use the URL bit.ly/SBT playground and experiment with it. It's based really on the current standards, and it's very similar to what developers are used with, like JS Fiddle or Google Playground, for example. And I'm just showing JavaScript here, but you have the same for Java and the same for XPages. So the second piece here is the API Explorer. So it's almost the same layout, with on the left side the list of the available APIs, and when you click on an API, then you can see the different verbs and the different URLs that you can exercise for this API, and then you can really exercise this API live. So the goal for IBM here is to cover our entire set of APIs through the API Explorer, so you can easily understand what an API is doing, what kind of parameters it's expecting, and what kind of results it's returning. So this is still a kind of bit theoretical. So now let me ask Mark to show us how you develop such an application using the Social Business Toolkit and the SDK. Mark?
Okay, thanks, Phil. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through a series of slides which show how to go from zero to having an application up and running in your own local development environment. So the starting point for this is to kind of to create your own trial account for SmartCloud for Social Business. So I've been through this process a couple of times during the last week, and it really only takes about 5 minutes. You just need to fill out a form online. You'll get an email confirmation then shortly afterwards. You just need to follow the link in the email and accept the license terms, and then you're up and running with your own organization, which you're an administrator of, and you can kind of create your own test users and your own test data. So it's a very straightforward process. The second thing then is that you need to kind of create a starting point application. So anytime I'm exploring a new development environment or a development model or programming language, I like to kind of get something up and running as quickly as possible, and then once I have something that's running end to end, start to experiment with it. So in our case, Phil has kind of introduced you to the playground, and this is really where you go to kind of experiment with code. You can see live code running. You can modify the code and see kind of what the impact of your changes is going to be. And then once you have something working, then you can kind of bring that back into your own SDK-based application and actually start to build out some functionality. The final stage then is around kind of integrating your application with SmartCloud for Social Business. And there's a couple of integration points. Niklas demonstrated one earlier. I'm going to take you through the process of integrating with the SmartCloud navigation bar, which allows you to kind of give a seamless transition from your application with the SmartCloud user interface. Okay, so I'm going to take you through a series of steps, and then I'll show you some screenshots of kind of what this looks like in real life. The scenario we're focusing on is for a J2E developer or a JavaScript developer who's going to run on a J2E platform, and using Eclipse as the development environment. So this is a very kind of easy to use kind of end-to-end scenario. And we've worked with a number of different customers, some internal teams within IBM during the year, and the steps that I'm going to take you through now are kind of like the optimum steps to kind of get something up and running quickly and easily. So you've got a couple of options to get at the SDK. What we're going to start doing is we want to encourage people to go to our Git repository, which is hosted up on GitHub, and you can either clone the repository to clone all of the source code, or you can download one of the stable builds from the Git repository. Download the source code for one of the stable releases. The stable releases they're coming out every 2 or 3 weeks, but we're automating the process, so we'll have a stable release available on a weekly basis. So once you've downloaded the source code or cloned the repository, all the projects can be built with Maven. So To install Maven, it's a very straightforward process. You just need to download a zip file for a Maven build, and then you need to have a Java runtime. So once you unzip our source code, configure Maven, which should only take a few minutes, then what you can do is there's two groups of projects you need to build. There's the Commons projects and the SDK itself. So what you need to do is just CD into those directories, run Maven clean install, and it will build those two parts of the SDK. Building them should only take a couple of minutes to actually build. It's very straightforward. Now the advantage of running the build locally is what that's going to do is it's going to take the dependencies that you need and put them into a local Maven repository. So when you import the projects into Eclipse, you don't have to have all of the dependencies within your Eclipse workspace. You only really need to have the projects that you're going to be working with. And that simplifies the setup of your development environment. We're going to be making our builds available in a public Maven repository. If it doesn't happen before the end of the year, it'll happen very early next year. And once we have that done, that'll simplify the process even further. You won't have to do a local build. You'll always be able to reference the latest version of the dependencies directly from a public Maven repository. The next thing you need to do is set up your preferred J2E server. So this is what's going to run where your application is going to run. The development team are all using Tomcat, and if you follow the instructions in our installation guide, you can download Tomcat. Again, it's just an unzip to kind of like get it up and running, and then you can configure it very easily for Eclipse, and then you can use that as your target runtime environment for the Eclipse project. The next step then is just to import the projects, right? So there's only two projects that you need to import into your workspace. One is our JavaScript library, and the second one then is one of our sample applications. So the one I'd recommend you start with is the My Social sample. So this is a very simple application. It just really has one HTML page, and it includes all the plumbing that you need in your application to use the Social Business Toolkit SDK. You'll need to configure the endpoint to use. This sample application will actually run with on-premise connections or SmartCloud using OAuth 1 or OAuth 2. All you need to do is provide one setting to say which of those endpoints you want to use, and then provide the connection settings, the configuration settings for that endpoint. So Phil showed you a screenshot earlier on where you can, using the administrative UI in SmartCloud, you can register an application, and then SmartCloud will generate a client ID and a client secret that you can use for OAuth authentication. So once you have those values and you can access them in the admin UI, you basically just need to add them to a file called spt.properties, and these are the configuration settings that the application will use to connect to SmartCloud. And that's all you need to do in order to be able to support OAuth 2 within your application. You don't need to kind of like, write any code. And in your client code, you don't need to do any kind of like, special coding to support OAuth. It's all is handled transparently for you. One thing that I'll just kind of point out is that the URL, typically when you create your trial account, if you create it and you specify the North America as the location, this is what the URL will be. It's the default URL. But if you specify Europe as your location, the URL changes slightly, so the NA will change to CE. It's just something to be aware of, because the OAuth flow won't work if you use the wrong URL. So if you use the North American URL and you registered your organization in Europe, it won't work. So it's just a little gotcha to be aware of. Okay, so now I'm going to guide you through kind of like just a series of screenshots. I'm going to show the applications imported into Eclipse, and then what the key parts of the application are. There's some plumbing that you need to add to every application that uses the SDK, and I'm going to just explain the purpose of that plumbing. Okay, so once you're up and running, you'll have Eclipse, you'll have Tomcat set up as a a run configuration, and then there's only 2 projects that you need to have in your workspace. So the SBT web, which is our JavaScript library, and the sample application itself. Inside the sample application, inside the Tomcat, you need to enable HTTPS within Tomcat in order to get the OAuth flow to work. The OAuth flow doesn't work with just a plain HTTP connection. You have to have SSL enabled. So in order to do that, you need to edit the context.xml, provide a key store to use. We provide both of these in the SDK kit. We provide a version of Tomcat that comes with these configurations already done in advance for you. And then you need to provide the sbt.properties, which contains your client ID and client secret for your SmartCloud organization. And these settings are basically managed outside of the application, and that allows you to basically switch from one SmartCloud organization to a different one very easily. The other thing that you need that's provided within the application is a file called managebeans.xml. And the managebeans.xml contains the definition of the endpoints that your application is going to use. You need one endpoint for every system that you want your application to connect to. So in this case, we're going to use a SmartCloud OAuth 2 endpoint, and that has all the settings to kind of like talk to your SmartCloud organization. In order to get the client code to use that endpoint, what you need to do is there's one value that you need to edit in the managebeans.xml, and there's a property called endpoints, and it has a value. By default, it's just set to connections, and that's the logical name of the endpoint to talk to. So in the client code, we refer to the connections endpoint. Now what we need to do is we need to map that to an actual endpoint, so we're connecting to a real system. So you can switch this between Connections Basic if you're using on-premise, or SmartCloud OAuth 1 or SmartCloud OAuth 2. Your client code is completely agnostic to what type of SmartCloud deployment or what type of connections deployment you're actually going to connect to. So all you need to do in this case is kind of like put in SmartCloud OAuth 2, and we'll connect to your SmartCloud organization. The next thing, this plumbing is provided for you. I'm just going to just point it out now. There's 2 servlets and a filter that need to be added to your application. So if you had an existing J2E application and you want to start using the SDK within it, what you'll need to do is edit the web.xml and add in these 2 servlets and the filter. The first servlet is our service servlet, and this is the proxy that we provide within the SDK. So the proxy serves 2 purposes. One, it gets around cross-origin requests. So your JavaScript needs to talk back to the proxy, and then the proxy talks to SmartCloud, because the client-side JavaScript can't make requests directly to the SmartCloud server. They can only talk back to the server that they were served up from. So that's why we need to have this proxy servlet. The other thing the proxy servlet does is it handles the authentication mechanism. So it reads the managebeans.xml, it sees that we're using OAuth 2, and it makes sure that the OAuth 2 dance is executed correctly. So you don't have to write any of your own code to kind of like handle the authentication. Then the library servlet is used to initialize our JavaScript library. Our JavaScript can coexist with an existing toolkit like Dojo or jQuery. You basically tell the library servlet what toolkit you're using, and it initializes our JavaScript library correctly to work with that toolkit. And then the last element here is the SBT filter, and this basically just generates a context object that's used by the 2 servlets. And so it's just an extra bit of plumbing that you need to include. The final thing that you need to do, and it's provided in the sample application, is specify the dependencies. So there are 4 jar files that you need to include in any web application to use the SDK, and these are basically the kind of the core runtime for the SDK, and they also include the Java API. The Java API is included in the sbt.core. Again, so this is just some standard plumbing that you need to include in any application. Okay, so once you have all of this kind of set up, you can then basically kind of like, we can start taking a look at how we would integrate the SDK within an existing application, within your client code. So within this application, we have one file, an index.html, and there's two things that we need to do in that. In the head area, we need to include a script tag to initialize the JavaScript library. So what we're doing is we're calling our library servlet. We're telling it that the library we're using is Dojo, and we're using Dojo version 1.8. And we support versions of Dojo starting with 1.4.3. And then basically what will happen is our library servlet will generate a small amount of JavaScript that will initialize our toolkit. Then further on down in the HTML page, we can actually start using the JavaScript API. So there's just a couple of aspects of the way our JavaScript API that I want to point out. In the middle, you'll see a call to a method called require. Now, what require will do is we're using a module loader to load all of our JavaScript modules. So what this allows us to do is it allows us, in our JavaScript, we can specify all the modules we depend on, and then the module loader will actually load those modules and their dependencies. So it allows you to more efficiently kind of like load the JavaScript. Like, we don't need to load the entire JavaScript library. We can just load what the page actually needs. If you look at the last highlighted area in this page, you can see here an example where we're retrieving the endpoint to use. Okay, so we're retrieving it using its logical name, which is Connections. On the endpoint has a property which is called is SmartCloud, which will tell us if it's a SmartCloud endpoint or not. Now, the services on SmartCloud, all of the services, with the exception of the profile services, are the same as when you deploy Connections on-premise. So right now, when you're using the profile service, you do have to put a is SmartCloud kind of like, check within your code to make sure that you use either the on-premise or the SmartCloud version of the profile service. So in this case, we're using the colleague grid, which displays my list of colleagues. And because that is built on top of the profile service, we have to do a different implementation for SmartCloud and on-premise. This is going to change in 2014. There's basically going to be a unified profile service for SmartCloud and on-premise. So that will simplify the code going forward. The other thing that we're doing in this application is that we're using some controls. We're displaying a list of colleagues, a list of communities, and a list of files. And in the top highlighted area, you can see that there's a bunch of templates that we're using. So the standard controls that we provide use one UI for their look and feel, but you can customize them by providing your own template. Template is just a snippet of HTML which determines how the control is going to lay out the contents. So in order to kind of like, change the look and feel, it's just an exercise in HTML programming. Okay, so when you run this example, you're going to get, it's using OAuth, so you're going to have to go through the OAuth stance. You're going to have to kind of like log on and then grant access for this application to access your SmartCloud data. Once you've done that, the application's up and running, and you can see it's displaying some data from SmartCloud. So it's displaying the name of the person who's logged on, their profile picture, who their colleagues are, what communities they own, and what files they own. Okay, so this shows how we can kind of like very easily kind of like grab data from SmartCloud and integrate it into a custom application. So the next thing we're going to look at, one other point about this is that not only, you'll notice that this particular application is using Bootstrap, so everything's kind of customized with a Bootstrap look and feel. You can also customize the behavior of the generic controls. So here, when you click on one of the files, we've basically just written a little bit of JavaScript that handles that action and just displays the information about the file the user has clicked. But you might want to perform your own operation, with that data in the context of your application. Okay, so the next thing we're going to look at is basically how to, now that we've got a simple application up and running, there may be some kind of functionality you have in mind to actually implement. So I'm just going to explain how to actually explore the samples that are in the playground and find the samples that are going to be useful to you. So Phil kind of introduced the playground earlier on, and he mentioned that there's a navigator on the left-hand side that allows you to access all the samples. The way that the samples is some top-level categories. So there's authentication that demonstrate how to use the different authentication mechanisms, some sample apps, and these are basically isolate the code from the sample applications that are provided in the SDK. And then there's a category of social samples. And the social samples basically correspond to the social services that are available within SmartCloud. And so you can see that we've got samples for activities, communities, files, all the different services that are available. The last two categories are Toolkit and utilities. These are typically useful. These are our low-level API. They're typically useful for people who are actually going to be building their own services on top of the Toolkit, because we've got other teams within IBM who are building out these services. But sometimes the low-level APIs can be useful. Okay, then, so within a category, and we're going to look at the communities category. When you expand that category, the first thing you'll see is a bunch of what we call demonstration snippets. So the demonstration snippets are, fully functional, and they typically will demonstrate how to perform create, update, delete operations on social data, and also how to retrieve collections of social data. So you can see here the example that I've selected is how to create, update, and delete a community. And when you see the sample running, you can see it's retrieved a community. I can see the community ID, the type of the community, its title, and of its tags and content. I can actually edit these values, hit the update button, and actually, if I'm an owner, I can modify that community. Or I can create another community or delete a community. So these type of samples tend to show the end-to-end functionality, kind of like for manipulating the data, the full life cycle of manipulating the data. Within the category, then there's also a subcategory called API. So the API category these are very, very focused snippets. They're very, very short, and what they do is they demonstrate how to use a single method within a particular API. So the one I've selected here is create community, and this shows me how to use the method in the community service which creates the community. Typically, when you're interacting with these samples, you're going to have to provide some input data. So you get here where I'm getting prompted for some parameters, the title and the content of the community that I want to create. The next type of samples are the control samples. So they'll be categorized under controls. These ones basically are reusable UI controls. So again, you can see the amount of JavaScript involved here is quite low. So I'm creating a community grid, specifying a type of my, and now what it'll do is it'll create a community grid that lists all of my communities. The grid has paging, so I can page over my communities. It has columns so that I can sort my communities, and it displays, using the one UI by default, it displays all the information about the communities. So these are quite high-level building blocks, but again, they're very customizable. The last category of samples, and typically we don't provide too many samples in this category, are the ones that are categorized under REST. And these use our low-level API to basically directly invoke a REST service. Okay, so the next thing I want to look at is basically, now we have an application up and running, maybe we've added some functionality to it, how we integrate it with Connections, with SmartCloud. So if I go into my administrative UI, I can go to Organization Extensions, and I've got an Organization extension here that's already set up, which is for the navigation bar. Okay, so if we look at the details that I needed to provide here, is the service name is the top navigation bar, and I need to provide some a name, a description, a couple of URLs, one to an image that's used, and one to the application itself. Once I save that, now when I go to my apps drop-down in the navigation bar, I can see my application. So users now from within SmartCloud can click here and navigate directly to that application. And the other thing that we'll want to be able to do, and it's provided in the sample, is if you go into the HTML, I can enable a style sheet, which points to the style sheet, the SmartCloud style sheet, and also I can enable a script tag, which allows me to embed the SmartCloud navigation bar within my application. And then what that allows me to do is now if I go back to my application, you can see I have the SmartCloud navigation bar. So if I've navigated from SmartCloud to this application, I can use the navigation bar to navigate back. So I don't kind of like lose my context or get lost when I transition to this other application. So I'm going to hand back over to Phil now to just to kind of wrap up.
Thank you, Mark. And you presented really a lot of information. I want to insist on the fact that when you're using the SDK, connecting to these services is something that is actually very easy and well encapsulated by all the libraries. If you want to really get more information on the SDK, if you want to see some videos, if you want to read the documentation, some slides like these slides, or ask questions, then here is a set of URLs that you can connect to. So you see that we are really on all the developer hubs, including GitHub, SlideShare, Stack Overflow, so feel free to connect to them and grab information or ask questions on Stack Overflow. There is also the documentation that is provided by IBM, which is available in the wiki at this particular bhwiki.nsf URL. So I would advise you to go there, and you'll find all the information you need about the Social Business Toolkit and the SDK. And finally, this is just the beginning of a journey with SmartCloud, because a lot more is coming in the future. I won't reveal to you everything that is coming yet, because I would like, we'll make these announcements of some of them actually at Connect. So if you come with us in January to Orlando, you'll be able to really get the latest that is happening in SmartCloud for Social Business and the SDK. But you'll see that the main direction that we're taking is really making SmartCloud for Social Business a real platform. So we're expanding the services, we're expanding the capabilities, and we are wrapping all these capabilities through the SDK in Java, JavaScript, XPages, and more to come to Connect to discover what will be the next platforms. Tracy, I think now it's back to you for question and answers.
Great. We don't have a lot of time left, but we do have a couple of good questions. We'll give you the first one, and if we can get to more, great. If not, we'll go ahead and answer them through email. So I think this first one, Mark, is for you. May I use the SDK to create iWidget open social gadget, which deploys to the on-premises connections?
Yes, so the answer is yes. You can configure the JavaScript library and tell it that you're running in an open social container, and then it'll use the open social APIs to actually talk to the back-end services. And one of the things we haven't had a chance to touch on is that there is an open social explorer within the playground, and you can use that to actually, experiment with gadgets. And we're going to add some samples in there that show that demonstrate using the SDK.
Great. Thank you very much, Mark. I do show that we're at the top of the hour. If you asked a question and it didn't get answered, we will make sure that your question is answered via email. We'd like to thank you all very much for joining us today. This concludes our webcast. Have a wonderful day.